Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to still look at part 2 or lesson 2 from consumer math, and the title for that lesson is money management, but we're still looking at units. Before we go into the lesson, I want to introduce myself. My name is Miriam. I'm your math instructor here at Penn. I'm here with the team since 2015. I have a master's in education and also certified to teach math in the state of Pennsylvania. Today, as we usually do, we have the lesson. We have some self-check questions within the lesson just to give you a chance to evaluate yourself and see how much you got that topic, or maybe how much more work you want to do towards that topic if you did not get that question correct. You're able to ask your questions, of course, using the questions box. You are able to type in your questions. The raise your hand feature is not enabled in the webinar. Registrants of this webinar, whether you are with us today or you could not attend, you will receive a follow-up email with the recorded webinar. The basic math review that we still on are measurements, and today we're gonna look at area and volume, unit conversion, and we're still looking at the metric and the English systems. When we speak about the metric, again, I want to remind you that the metric system is not used in the States. So units like meters and kilograms and millimeters, we do not usually use in our daily life, but we still have to know how to do the calculations. In the past, we did go over the units for length, like meters, like centimeters. Today, we're going to look at squared units and cubed units. And both of these units are used for area. And for area, we always use squared units, whether it's a metric system or it's an English system. It's always that we use squared units for area and cubed units for volume. Whenever you are doing the exam, whether you have an open book exam or a closed book exam, you will have an access to the conversion tables. Today, let's go ahead and look at the metric units for area first and volume, and then later on in the webinar, we're going to go over the English area and volume units. So whenever you have a question on area or volume, you will have access to those tables, and you will know, for example, how many millimeters squared or squared millimeters in 1 squared centimeter. So it's easy as just look at the table, locate where the information that you need for the question, and use that factual information in your proportion. If you remember in the first webinar in this series, we went over 2 methods to convert units. One of them is first to decide which unit is larger and which unit is smaller. And if we are converting from large to small or small to large, this is when we decide also, are we multiplying or dividing over the conversion factor. Method 2 that we talked about is proportion. The good thing about method 2 that I'm going to use again in this webinar is that we do not have to figure out, is a squared millimeter greater than a squared centimeter, especially when it comes with metric system. Because we do not use those units in everyday life, it's going to be hard for me to visualize, is a hectare bigger than a square kilometers, for example. We do not use that in everyday life, so the best method to do is a proportion method. Now, if you look at the tables, you will see the values there. So 1 squared meters equals to 10,000 square centimeters. What if, just assumption, what if you did not have the access to the conversion tables for area and volume, and your question wants you to figure out how many certain number of square centimeters in a certain number of squared meters? You want that information, but the only access that you have is the length conversion table. So if the information that you have only is that 1 meter equals to 100 centimeter, notice the units are only length, but you need the area units. We can conclude actually those values by squaring the factual information here, because remember, area is in squared units. So if I square the 1, and remember, squaring the 1 here, it's not like 1 times 2. It's 1 times itself. 1 times 1 is 1. So 1 meters squared, and with metric units, we always use the exponent 2 to give the impression that this unit is squared, as opposed to English units where we just abbreviate the word squared, SQ. Now, if I also square the 100, that means 100 times 100, that will give me the 10,000 square centimeters or centimeters squared. So from the length information here about the meters and the centimeters, I can square and find out the information I need in my question if you don't have the access to the area table. What about the volume? The same idea. If you have an axis that 1 meters equals to 100 centimeters, then what about the volume? What about 1 cubed meters equals to how many cubed centimeters? Cube the values. When you cube a value, you multiply itself 3 times. So 1 times 1 times 1 will give you 1 meters cubed equals to 100 times 100 times 100. You're cubing the 100, and that will give you the million with 6 zeros. And that would be in squared centimeters, or I'm sorry, cubed centimeter, because we cube the units. So this is how we got those numbers here. We square the values or cube the values if we need the volume. Just wanted to give you a background on why we use those values and what if you only have an access to the length conversion table, not the area and not the volume ones. Questions so far? Okay, let's move on then to our lesson, the math behind the tables. So a question like how many square kilometers in 50 hectares? Of course, when I get a question like this in the exam or in my practice questions or in life, if I encounter that in life, I'm not gonna tease my brain thinking which one is bigger, a hectare or a square kilometers. I mean, you can figure it out by Googling the question. Is hectare bigger or square kilometers bigger? But the way that we can do it without Googling anything is just use the conversion tables that you have and proportion. And the proportion method does not need you to know which one is bigger. All we need to do, as we did in previous webinars, set up the proportion correctly. So remember, a proportion is 2 equal fractions. One fraction will have the factual information that we're going to get from the table. The second fraction will have the information given in the question. The factual information goes in the first fraction. So I know, since we're talking about square kilometers and hectares from the table, the information is that 1 kilometer squared equals to 100 hectares. I did not make this up. I didn't calculate anything, just right from the table. Now, the factual information then goes on the first fraction. 1 kilometer squared is equivalent to, the denominator will be 100 hectares. Now, the second fraction, remember with proportions, to set them correctly, we have to keep the order. I have kilometers squared and then hectares, the same thing. On the top, it has to be kilometers squared. So how many kilometers squared or square kilometers would be if we have 50 hectares instead? And we talked about how to solve the proportion. Remember, we cross multiply the two known values and divide over the remaining values. So multiply and divide. So the number of kilometers squared in 50 hectares, that's a 0, would be multiply, divide. 1 times 50 is 50. So the same as saying just 50 over 100. So divide 50 over 100 will give you a half. So you can say that 0.5 or 1 over 2 is the same answer, and that would be in kilometers squared. So there are half or 1 over 2 kilometers squared in every 50 hectares. And this is how we figure out the unit conversion. Any question? Remember that you have the chance to ask the questions by typing your questions in the questions box. Okay, let's look at the second question. The first question, it was area. And how did I know that? Because we have squared kilometers. And always the question will ask you to convert an area unit to another area unit. There is no way that the question will ask you to change an area unit to a volume unit. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have a meaning. So either you have to change a metric area unit to another metric area unit, an English area unit to another English area unit, or sometimes you have to change between the systems, metric to English or English to system. But all the chances that you will have a conversion question is that they will keep the same kind of unit squared if the question is asking you to change for area. Length, it will stay length on both. So change 1 meter to how many centimeters is there. So both of them are length, and so on. So the second question, we are changing from a volume unit to another volume unit. How many cubic millimeters in 5 centimeters cubed or cubic centimeters? Again, I'm not going to invent anything. The information are there in the table. So from the table, we know that 1 cubic centimeters equals to 1,000 millimeters cubed. So since we are changing cubic centimeters to cubic millimeters, I don't have to think in my head which one is bigger. Right away, set up your proportion to fractions. Set up the proportion correctly. I'm gonna do 1 centimeters cubed on the top. On the bottom, I'm gonna choose to put the 1,000 millimeters cubed. You can do millimeters cubed over centimeters cubed, but you have to keep the order on the second fraction, so you get the right answer. So since it's asking how many cubic millimeters, then the unknown would be on the denominator, and the known would be on the numerator. The same idea, I have a proportion. A proportion has 4 values. Always I will have 3 known and 1 unknown. In this case, multiply and divide. So you're gonna cross multiply and then divide. So the number of cubic millimeters in 5 cubic centimeters equals to, so 5 times 1,000 over 1. It's really like only multiplying and not dividing at all, because 5 times 1,000 and 5,000 over 1 is still 5,000. So your answer will be 5,000 what? Your units would be the unknown units, which is going to be cubic millimeters. And that's it. Any questions so far? Anything that did not make sense, or when you read the lesson, they did it a different way that doesn't go with what we have here in the webinar? Okay, let's move on to a self-check question. So again, those questions are not graded. These are just provided for you to test yourself, assess yourself, see if you are able to convert units correctly or no when it comes to volume or area. Let's read the question together. And I just brought the conversion table here, so we have the information on the screen as well. And then I'm going to change my screen, give you the chance to look at the question again. But now we will have the you will have the option to enter your answer. And I will not going to look at who did the question correctly or no. This is merely for you. So the question is simple, is asking a box is 3 centimeters long, 2 centimeters wide, and 4 centimeters deep. What is the volume of the box in cubic millimeters? So in your head, you are converting between a metric volume unit to another metric volume unit.
Now, the hint gives you the formula for volume. For rectangular box or a cube, we always always multiply the 3 dimensions of the box, whether it's a rectangular box or a cube. So length times width times depth will give you the volume of the cube or the box. What is the volume though in cubic millimeters? Which one is correct? I'm going to leave the screen here for about 10 seconds, copy down the information that you need from the conversion table, and then I'm going to change my screen after. Okay, let's then change the screen to the question and give you the chance to enter your answers. And here you go. I usually give a minute for students to work on the problem. One of the things that you've asked in these webinars that I give you more time so everyone have a chance to enter their answers and see if they got the right answer or no. So I'm gonna give another 15 seconds extra on top of the 1 minute so everyone really have a chance to look at the question, take their time with their calculations and select their answer. Okay, let's do then the question together and look at the right answer and why it is the right answer. So now again, it's a box. We have the dimensions in centimeters, and remember, they are giving us the dimensions in centimeters, not centimeters squared or square centimeters, because they are simply giving us the length of each side. Our job is to find the volume in a different unit. So first of all, the first step I'm going to do is to find the volume using the the cubed centimeters unit. So what I'm going to do, step number 1, I'm going to do the volume in cubed centimeters, which is simply multiply all the sides together. So 3 times 2 times 4, and that will give you the volume in the cubic centimeters. So it's going to be 24 centimeters cubed. Now, the answers are not in centimeters cubed or cubic centimeters. We have to switch the cubic centimeters to cubic millimeters. Now, to do that, I need a piece of information from the table. The one that serves me is the last row. 1 cubic centimeter equals to 1,000 cubic millimeter. If you think about it, 1 centimeter in length equals to 10 millimeters. So when we want to go to the cubic units, we just cube the numbers. 1 cubed is 1, and that would be cubed, equals to 10 cubed is not 10 times 3. It's going to be 10 times itself 3 times. 10 times 10 times 10 will give you the 1,000 millimeter cubed. It's there for us, but it's good to know why. Now, step number 2, I need to switch the unit. So to switch a unit or to convert a unit, then we have to use proportion. The factual information on the first fraction, 1 cubic centimeters equals to 1,000 cubic millimeters. Now, if I have 24 cubic centimeters, what would be the equivalency in cubic millimeters? For that, we have to solve the proportion. So
multiply and divide. So multiplying 24 times 1,000 will give you 24,000 over 1. It's really like 24,000. It's like multiplying with no division because the 1 doesn't change the answer for us at all. So the volume in cubic millimeters equals to 24 times 1,000. I'm just going to write down the division. So if you just attended the webinar today for the first time, you will know what I'm talking about with division. So we multiply and divide. So here's what we did, multiply and divide. And since the top is 24 times 1,000, 24,000 over 1 is the same as saying 24,000. And the units this time will be cubic millimeters. And for that, B is the correct answer. Any question on this one problem? Okay, let's move on to a different topic. And this time we're going to do the same thing. The only thing that we're going to do differently is the English unit for area and English units for volume. And again, we use the English units in the States. So you will see squared yards, square feet, squared miles, acres. These are the kind of things that we use here. And we're more familiar on visualizing the unit in our head when we do a problem. But still, I'm going to stick to method 2 just to keep consistent with every kind of conversion that we have to do, whether it's within the English or metric system. It's the same method. I don't have to switch methods depending on which system I'm working on. So that would make it easier. Again, I don't have to mention that those units, those values, again, comes from the same way. We know that 1 yard, that's a length, equals to 3 feet. Then if I want to find the squared unit, then squared values. 1 squared is 1 times 1 is 1, and that would be squared yards. They do not put the exponent as a 2 for English units. They just do the abbreviation SQ and the abbreviation of the units. Equals to 3 squared is not 6. It's 3 times 3 is a 9. So that would be squared feet. The same thing for the volume units. The same idea. We start out with the length unit that we know and cube the two values. So 1 cube or cubic yards equals to 3 times 3 is 9 times 3 is 27 cubic feet. And this is how we get these values in case that you don't have an access to the actual area and volume tables. Now let's look at examples. How many acres in 3 squared miles? These are big units, so I'm not gonna recall them from my mind. I'm gonna go and refer to the table. The table says that one squared mile equals to 640 acres. And we always or usually use these units for land. So that is area units. So acres, we don't say squared acres because acres is already an area unit, like liters, for example. We do not say squared liters because liter is a unit for measuring liquid or volume. Cubic liter, I should say. So how many acres in 3 squared miles? So again, a proportion. Factual information goes here. 1 squared mile equals to 640 acres. I'm just going to use the capital A for acres. So what about 3 squared mile? Notice the order. So on the bottom of the second fraction will go the acres, and this is what we do not know. So solve the proportion, cross multiply and divide. So multiply, divide. So the number of acres in 3 squared miles equals to multiply. So 3 times 640 over 1 is like just multiplying. So simply multiply 3 times 640, and that will give you the number of acres, 1,920 acres.
Questions? How many squared inches in 4 squared yards? Again, we are converting area to area, but we are converting squared inches to squared yards. Look at the conversion table. If we go back, the information that we need in this question says 1 squared yards equals to let me see. So 1 yard has 36 inches times 36 times 36. So that would be, let me make sure of that number. I'm going to go back one slide. So one squared yard equals to, I need to make sure of that number. Give me 1 second. So let's think about that. And I like these challenges. So because I'm doubting the number on the table, I'm going to do that manually. So I'm going to think 1 yard, I'm talking about length now, equals to how many feet? It's 3 feet. Now each foot has 12. So that means that 3 times 12 would give me 36 inches in 1 yard. Now I need I need to square the units because my question is about area. So 1 squared yard would be 1 times 1, so the 1 squared yard. And then 36 times 36 will give me the correct number I have on the table that is correct, 1,296 squared inches. Now, I like that what happened now, because this is a good way to know the background of knowledge that we use, because I doubted myself, and this is, the truth. I did doubt the 1,296 squared inches, but because I know how to get that number, I did work from scratch, and I come to calculate that one number, and that's how I make sure that my numbers are correct. So the conversion fact that I'm going to use is this one here. Okay, so proportion, 1 squared yard equals to, now I know for sure, 1,296 squared inches. Okay, and then since we are talking about 4 squared yards, that would be how many then squared inches? The same idea, multiply, divide. So the number of squared inches in 4 squared yards would be multiply 4 times 1,296 divided by a 1, which is not going to affect our answer. So we can just go ahead and multiply 4 times 1,296 on the calculator, and that will give you the number of squared inches, 5,184 squared inches. Always when you work in geometry with volume and area or unit conversion in this lesson, remember to put the units. Because if you just keep your answer as 5,184 what? Like centimeters, like apples, oranges, what? You need to define your number result. So remember to associate your answer with the correct unit. Questions? Anything that was not clear? Okay, let's move on to a self-check question. Let's read the question together first, and here's the conversion table that we would need. The floor in your living room measures 10 squared yards. It makes sense because a floor is an area, and that's why we're using squared yards. You decide to install tiles to make over the room. If each tile covers 1.25 square foot, and that makes sense too, because we will measure the area that the one tile covers in squared units. How many tiles you will need to complete the project? So now the area is given in square yards, but one tile covers that much square feet. What should I do?
to figure out the number of tiles I need to complete the makeover project. I'm going to leave that screen until you get the information down and then go to the other screen. Okay, so you should have the information from the question and the factual information from that one table down on paper. And now we can switch to the screen where you can choose your answers. And here you go. Remember that when we work on the problem, we need the answer in tiles. We're not looking for how many square foot in 10 squared yards. One tile cover 1.25 square feet. So I just thought to give you that hint before you enter your answers. And if you did and you realize it's incorrect, it's fine. It's not the end of the world. We're learning. I'm learning too. So don't panic if you did not get a question or two incorrect. It's a learning cycle, and this is what should happen. Okay, let's do the question together then and see what the answer is. So again, to that question, the floor is 10 square yards. Each tile is 1.25 square feet. Now, there's two ways to do that problem. Either you change the 1.25 feet to square yards and then divide 10 over that number of square yards. That will give you the number of tiles. This is not the method I prefer. Or the second method that I did that question with is to do the other way around. I'm going to change the square yards to square feet and then divide. So let's do that together. So step number one, I'm going to convert. So I'm going to write this down. So you have the reference here, convert 10 square yards to square feet. And to do that, as you know, we're going to use the proportion, two fractions. One that has the factual information, 1 square yards equals to 9 square feet. Now, what if we have 10 square yards? Then how many square foot is that? So multiply, divide. 10 times 9 is 90 over 1 is still 90. So you have 90 square feet. This is the area. This is the area. That's not the number of the tiles. We just converted the area from square yards to square feet. That's it. Now, step number 2 is to divide the area in square feet divided by the area that each tile covers. So number of tiles equals to 90 over 1.25. Both of these are now square feet. So use a calculator. 90 over 1.25 will give you about 72 tiles. And the answer in this case would be D. Any questions? Anything that was not clear on how did we go through that problem? Okay, let's move on to the last section in this webinar, which is how can you convert then from one system to another? I like to go and set up my conversion table from English to metric, because we know what is a 1 square foot. I mean, roughly we know it's like a one regular tile, for example. And then we give the equivalency in squared meters. And instead of starting with a 1 square meter, which we cannot imagine in our mind how much is that, and then get a fraction of a squared feet. That would be tough, thing to imagine when you have the table set up like that. So I always have the English unit converts to metric units. So these are all area units. You see here the inches, feet, yard, acre, square miles. Here we have the square centimeters, square meters, and so on. Hectare is a metric unit as well. So you just use those tables. You don't have to know where we got those numbers from, and you don't have to know either how did we get the numbers on the other conversion tables. I just thought to give you the knowledge of that. But it's good to know more than you need to know, just in case. Area for volume, for the English units, we are used to gallons and quarts. In metric units, you usually use liters and cubic meters. One thing that you wanted to mention, because I saw your lesson going into pints, 1 quart, which is an English unit, equals to 2 pints, another English unit. Okay, let's look at then questions. How many hectares, and that is metric, is in 100 acres, which is English, of land? So we are changing between units. In method 2, which is the proportion method, I really don't have to know which one is metric and which one is English. I'm just going to go ahead and set up my proportion. Once I locate that one information, I'm going to get from the table. So from the table, 1 acre equals to 0.4047 hectares. This is a factual information I just copied down. On my proportion, 2 fractions. One has the factual information 1 acre equals to 0.4047 hectares. Then what about if we have 100 acres? What would be that in hectares? The same way, solve the proportion, cross multiply, and divide. So number of hectares in 100 acres equals to multiply, so 100 times 0.4047 divided by 1. So that is like just multiply that times 100, and you have just to move the decimal point twice to the right, or you can use your calculator, and that would give you 40.47 hectares. And that's it. So we're just repeating the method. No matter what units we're using, it's the same method. How many squared inches in 10 squared centimeters? I don't care which one is metric, and I know it's the English one is squared inches and the metric one is, of course, the square centimeters, but I don't have to squeeze my mind and bring that into my solution. I just have to do the right way that we learned about the method number 2. Locate the factual information, and 1 squared inches equals to 6.4516 squared centimeters. Now, proportion. Factual information on the first fraction. So 1 squared inches is equivalent to 6.4516 squared centimeters. What if we have 10 squared centimeters? What should we do? So the same thing, solve the proportion. So multiply, divide. 1 times 10 will give you 10 divided by 6.4516. So our solution will look like this. Number of squared inches in 10 squared centimeters will be 1 times 10 over 6.4516. 1 times 10 is like 10. So it's like dividing 10 over the 6.45. So use a calculator. If you want to do the long division by hand, you're welcome to do so if you're going to do the steps correctly. In these kind of units, since we're not learning long division, we can use a calculator. So divide, and that will give you right the answer, 1.55, and the units are squared inches. That's it. So we're repeating ourselves here. So if you see a question with cubic metric units or cubic English units or squared units of any kind, don't get overwhelmed. It's the same method as long as you set up the proportion correctly and you do solve correctly. Okay, now let's look at a self-check. Let's read the question together. A portable water tank is used to save tap water in case water is shut off in your area for utility work. The capacity of the tank is 15 liters. The only way to transfer the water to the tank is by using a pint cup. Approximately how many times you have to fill the cup if you wish to fill the water tank? So the units that we are converting to or from liters to pints. The table is there and it gives you information about the pints and liters. So I'm going to keep it for a while. Put the information from the question, extract the information that you need from the question and from the table, and then I'm going to change my screen in a few seconds. Okay, let's go to the question there. So here's the question and the answer choices. Fifteen more seconds and we can go over the question together. If you need more time, you can type in the question box. Please allow more time. If you really want to do the question and enter your answers, I can always wait. Okay, let's then do the question together. And let's see then how many times or how many pints we need to fill out that 15-liter water tank. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to change liters to quarts because the table relates liters here, liters with quarts. So since I know my tank is 15 liters, then I have to wonder how many quarts is that. And from there, since I know that each quart has 2 pints, I can just double that number or do another proportion if you wish, and then find how many pints we need, and that would equivalent to how many times we need to fill out that 1 pint cup to fill out the water tank. So let's do that one step at a time. So one convert liters to quarts. I'm going to do that using a proportion equals to a fraction. 1 quart, I know, equals to how many liters?
0.946 liters. If I have 15 liters, then how many quarts is that? Same idea, multiply, divide. So number of quarts in a water tank equals to multiply 1 times 15 is 15, and then divide over 0.9461 equals to, use a calculator, and that will give you how many quarts the water tank is. So it is 15.85 quarts. Now, the cup is not 1 quart, the cup is a pint, and there are 2 pints in 1 quart. I can simply multiply 15.85 times 2, or if you're not confident enough to just do that right away, we can do another proportion. We can think of this step as converting quarts to pints. So let's do it with a proportion, because most of us can do the multiplication. 2 times that number will give you the number of pints, but let's say that you did not realize it just as simple as multiplication. So number 2, convert quarts to pints. So a proportion equals 2. I know that 1 quart equals to 2 pints. Then how many pints would be there in 15.85 quarts? And that would be the unknown, how many pints. So what I'm going to do is multiply and divide. If you look really at the proportion, 15.85 times 2 over 1 is the same as doubling the amount of quarts, which is what we initially thought of. So number of pints equals to 15.85 times 2, and that will give you the number of pints, and it is 31.7 approximately. You will have to fill that 1 pint cup 32 times to fill the 15-liter water tank, so you are able to save water in those times that there's no water. So this is how we figured it out. Question. Anything that was not clear so far in the webinar? Okay, let's then see how can we study for the exam then. Studying for the exam is not enough for you to watch the webinar or watch a couple of videos. I always encourage that you read the lesson. You need to do the readings. You need to practice the questions. Again, it's not enough for you to watch somebody else doing the questions. You have to pick up your pencil and paper, keep a notebook, and do the questions yourself. Because the more you do mistakes, the more you learn. If you do mistakes at all, if you get it from the first time, good. But still, you have to practice the questions to be able to do good in the exam and to, learn for our use, for our everyday use. You can watch the webinar whenever you receive the recording. Practice questions or discover more questions that are available within your lesson. You're able always to look up the answer key and compare your answers. If most of them are correct, then it's an indication that you're ready for the exam. If most are incorrect, do not proceed to the exam. You need to wait, either seek help from us here, or you want to maybe revisit that lesson and see what you can do about that. Khan Academy is a free site. It's not required. It's not something that we have an affiliation with, but they have their free videos there. You can use them. If you go to their website, on the top left, click on subjects, 5th grade math, and measurement and data would be the most relevant set of videos that they have with this lesson. If you want help from one of us here, you can call 9 to 6 Eastern Time on weekdays, or you can email. I'm going to show you later how to email, or you can schedule an appointment. You can state the date and the time. We can call you back on that time. You want to specify which course and which lesson in the course. You can text message. If you want to text message an instructor or teacher assistant, you want to text that number and type in learn.
You can chat or email, and the way to do that, you need to log into the account, to your account, and either you have this kind of account where you have the tabs on the top, or this kind of account you have the tabs on the left. It's the same function, just a different, setup for the page. If you have that kind of account, you want to click on Help Center and then ask a question. You may have to click on the search button here without typing any keywords and then click on Contact Us. Or you can click on Chat if you want to have just a brief question answered. If you have this kind of the account, you can click on Help and Support. You may have to click on that search button first and then click on Contact Us and then fill out the form here or there and submit your questions, and that will send us your email to our email system. If you have a math question, for example, whoever is going to handle the email will transfer that to the math department. Thank you for everything. Thank you for attendance. If you have any feedback, I did not upload the survey, but if you have any feedback on the webinar, if you have positive feedback or a negative feedback, I would like to hear them. You can email your feedback. You can call or we can chat and say, well, I didn't like the webinar because I was expecting this and this, or I like the webinar because I found this and this useful. Any questions before I end the webinar? Okay, if you don't have any questions for me, I wish good luck to you on the exam. Take your time, study. If you have questions, we're here. Good luck.